Time and Jim Talamonte.
Right now, the CTA has service disruptions on the green and blue lines due to separate incidents involving unauthorized people on the tracks. On the blue line, trains are standing near Harlem due to an unauthorized person on the tracks in that area. This is on the O'Hare branch near Harlem. So consider an alternative. And on the south side, green line service is cut off right now between Ashland 63rd and Garfield after an incident involving an unauthorized person on the tracks near Holstead. Northwest side, traffic signals are out at Harlem and Bryn Mawr. You'll have some congestion there. Traffic's heavy right now on the inbound Stevenson, Cicero to Kedzie. It's just a brief slowdown. Same goes for the inbound Rhine approaching downtown. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1 hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Clouds and sun through the morning, a possible pop-up thunderstorm as we become windier in the afternoon. Not quite as hot, high 85. Hardly sunny and 72 right now. Next news at 7. Breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Air Force General Charles Q. Brown Jr. was confirmed as the first black chief of staff for the Air Force, making him the first black to lead a major branch of the military. Colin Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but he didn't run a military service. Right. By contrast, General Brown made his way through the ranks the hard way. F-16 pilot, flying some 3,000 hours. Held various Air Force commands in Asia and the Middle East. Recently led the U.S. Pacific Air Forces, which provided insight into the rise of China's military. And he posted a 5-minute video that was made for those under his command in the wake of the George Floyd killing, with his perspective on the two worlds in which he's lived as a black American and as a black American in the military and a military officer. It's interesting. Here's what General Brown had to say.
As the commander of Pacific Air Forces, a senior leader in our Air Force, and an African American, many of you may be wondering what I'm thinking about the current events surrounding the tragic death of George Floyd. Here's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about how full I am with emotion, not just for George Floyd, but the many African Americans that have suffered the same fate as George Floyd. I'm thinking about protests in my country, 'tis the sweet land of liberty, the equality expressed in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that I've sworn my adult life to support and defend. I'm thinking about a history of racial issues and my own experiences that didn't always sing of liberty and equality. I'm thinking about living in two worlds, each with their own perspective and views. I'm thinking about my sister and I being the only African Americans in our entire elementary school and trying to fit in. I'm thinking about then going to a high school where roughly half the students were African American and trying to fit in. I'm thinking about my Air Force career, where I was often the only African American in my squadron, or as a senior officer, the only African American in the room. I'm thinking about wearing the same flight suit with the same wings on my chest as my peers, and they being questioned by another military member, are you a pilot? I'm thinking about how I sometimes felt my comments were perceived to represent the African American perspective, when it's just my perspective informed by being African American. I'm thinking about some of the insensitive comments made without awareness by others. I'm thinking about being a captain at the Oak Club with my squadron and being told by other African Americans that I wasn't black enough since I was spending more time with my squadron than with them. I'm thinking about my mentors and how rarely I had a mentor that looked like me. I'm thinking about the sound advice that has led to my success, and even so, most of my mentors could not relate to my experience as an African American. I'm thinking about the pressure I felt to perform error-free, especially for supervisors I perceive had expected less from me as an African American. I'm thinking about having to represent by working twice as hard to prove their expectations and perceptions of African Americans were invalid. I'm thinking about the airmen that have lived through similar experiences and feelings as mine, or who were either consciously or unconsciously unfairly treated. Conversely, I'm thinking about the airmen who don't have a life similar to mine and don't have to navigate through two worlds. I'm thinking about how these airmen view racism, whether they don't see it as a problem since it doesn't happen to them, or whether they're empathetic. I'm thinking about our two sons. Now we had to prepare them to live in two worlds. I'm thinking about the frank and emotional conversations my wife and I have had with them just this past week as we discussed the situations that have led to the protests around our country. Finally, I'm thinking about my historic nomination to be the first African American to serve as the Air Force Chief of Staff. I'm thinking about the African Americans that went before me to make this opportunity possible. I'm thinking about the immense expectations that come with this historic nomination, particularly through the lens of current events plaguing our nation. I'm thinking about how I may have fallen short in my career.
And how he can do better going forward, particularly in his new post. That's a lot of thinking that General Brown is doing. I wish more people would do as much thinking. But the two worlds frame for his comments is really interesting. And I think if you had more honesty along the lines of what General Brown offered, you could get from two worlds to one world. We don't have to be the same. We just have to be treated the same under the law. That distinction seems to be lost in these conversations. And by the way, mentored by people that didn't understand his experience, basically saying they were white, all through his career to his historic perch now. I thought that I tried to fit in a grade school where me and my sister were the only two black kids. And then I tried to fit in a high school where half of the kids were black kids. But, because I was a different kind of kid. And so it wasn't so much white and black. It was about me, Charles Brown. Very interesting. And those who went before him, I want to reference back to this op-ed we mentioned when it was published last year, right before we celebrated our nation's birthday on July 4th, by Harry Stewart, who was a former Tuskegee Airman, who was his birthday also July 4th. Love the symmetry. Turning 95. He turned 95 years old last July 4th, and he wrote this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. He received a Distinguished Flying Cross, World War II veteran. And he wrote, "I was thankful that my country had given me the opportunity to fly and fight. And all these years later, I am proud I contributed to the cause. We called it winning the double V, victory against totalitarianism abroad and institutional racism at home. July 4th is my birthday, but I celebrate my country's birthday too. America was not perfect in the 1940s, and it's not perfect today, yet I fought for it then and would do so again." So you can take the perspective of retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart and General Brown, thoughtful perspective, contextual perspective, like where America has come, that America 2020 is a different place than America 1963, than America 1945 when Harry Stewart was flying fighters for this country. Or you can take the hysterical position of the race hustlers and the race hustling politicians and the mindless, guilt-ridden leftists, whites. So your choice. Which do you think is the more reasoned, textured, thoughtful, adult position? For more on all of this, pleased to be joined by another thoughtful gentleman. He is Dean Angelo Sr. He's a retired Chicago Police Department officer and former president of Chicago FOP, regular guest on this program. Dean, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. So you spent 35 years, if I recall correctly, on the force, and then served as FOP president. And I was mentioning earlier in the program that you have a Chicago Police Department. About half the police officers, last I looked, are black or Latino. So it's a diverse police force. You representing the rank and file officers, and for a time as FOP president, you interacting with rank and file officers as an officer yourself. Your perspective on race and policing.
Well, there is so much involved in a question like that you have to examine. You have to consider that there are people that walk into an academy that never sat next to someone of color their entire life, as they grew up in all white suburbia or elementary schools. We heard about the letter you just read, being the only African American in a class or in a school. So when you bring people into the academy, this could be the first interaction with diverse populations. And now you want to school them on acceptance and recognitions and all of the day-to-day life changes and interactions that these individuals have had over the course of their lives. And you hear those issues and complaints and stresses for the first time, never even realizing they existed. So now people are becoming more and more aware of how other populations have been treated or are still being treated, in communities of color by the people that are assigned to protect them. So it's a huge learning curve. And in 6 months, you're getting pushed out to do this job and to walk on water, more or less, in this field, because everything is being armchair quarterbacked. It's a tough go, and people expect you, once you put that uniform on, no one knows you're brand new. Yeah, I call it on your first pair of boots, but you're expected to do the job and perform in a way that an officer representing that city is been hired to do.
But I mean, but with officers that, black officers, Latino officers, is there perspective sharing that goes on to help inform everybody's perspective, including black and Latino officers? I mean, this is, it should be a two-way or multi-dimensional conversation.
It should be, and there used to be a program, because I, have another career as an academic. I was a tenured professor that I left that position to come in and try to serve FOP. I've been in higher ed for well over 23 years, 25 years almost now, as an adjunct and as a full-timer. But we had a class at the academy when I taught, and it was called cultural diversity. Everyone was assigned a different ethnicity to bring in the different types of meals that you have, which was a good part. People would bring in homemade cooking, but it was also part of how you grew up. What are your celebrations? What are your weddings like? What are your Christmases like? What are your family dinners like? What's your home life that people may not be aware of? And it was really informative. Everyone in the room enjoyed it. Everyone was looking forward to those presentation days where people could share. And I thought it was a great class. And several years ago, it was removed from the curriculum. So it makes no sense. If you want people to experience other people's cultures and realize about diversity firsthand, you would think that would be a good idea to maintain that type of a course in the curriculum. And it's been gone for years. So, I think it's important that people do share. Everyone that's gone through a police academy will notice or will speak to noticing how like backgrounds, like ethnicities tend to gravitate towards each other. The guys and the girls will come in together, they'll drive each other because they live close nearby to each other. They'll have breakfast together, they'll have lunch together, they'll have parties together. as a collective group, generally feeling more comfortable with individuals that look like them, that grew up like them. So even within the department, you have those separations based on ethnicity and based on, how you feel more comfortable or who you feel more comfortable with.
Dean, New York Police Union called yesterday for people to stop vilifying police in New York. Do you think that that's happening still here in Chicago? I mean, I've covered some of these protests, and I cannot believe the disdain and anger and just crudeness launched at police. They're calling them all sorts of things, and the police have to, they can't respond. But is this the worst you've ever seen?
Well, I thought what we experienced back, after post-Ferguson, post-Baltimore, post-Chicago, that we were looking at what was the worst type of relationship with the police. I asked the old senior guys that did the 60s riots and assassination unrest that followed Dr. King's assassination, and to the last one, they all shook their head at the same time that they had never seen it like this before. And I think this is another more powerful wave of discontent that takes over that last level of disturbances and relationship. I don't think we've seen it this bad before. And I think if there and when I should say when there's another incident down the road, I think that wave will even, outsplash this wave. So things seem to be getting stronger. These demonstrations seem to be getting more intense, more populated, and bringing in new converts, for lack of a better word. But it is bad. I've got two on the Chicago Police Department. One won the lottery. He's on the fire department, but they're exhausted. They're doing 12, at least 12-hour days, 10 days in a row. For some of them, it's bad out there, and these frontline officers, God bless them, what they experienced and how they held their composure, because most people don't accept that type of behavior. I mean, the projectiles, what they were throwing at them.
130 officers were injured, and no one in the mainstream media even brings it up. I mean, people had surgeries. One guy had a heart attack. Another police officer was run over by a vehicle. And crickets on TV.
Right. I just heard this morning that they're going to minimize the amount of police shows and roles written into primetime TV.
Yeah, they canceled
There's
cops.
going to be less and less police. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, we had 2 people shot the last 3 days. One young kid off duty, and one guy off. One guy on duty and one off. And again, you said crickets. It's surprising that you don't get in front of that and show people the human side of policing, and that's what everyone needs to see. Just like you have to experience people's backgrounds and cultures to get acceptance or to get at least some type of recognition and awareness. People should be looking to do the same thing for the police officers, but they're set aside. I think that's the frustrations that you heard from the president of the NYPD.
There's a lot of discussion about police reforms. There's Republican and Democrat proposals moving around in the halls of Congress. Some of what's happening at the municipal level is with respect to particular submission holds, not to go full WWF on you, but the different types of approaches you use to get control and detain a suspect who's resisting and so forth. What about the complaint that you hear from police officers a lot, that they're asked to play all these roles, wear all these different hats, be psychologist, social worker, law enforcement officer, etc.? What about rather than defunding or dismantling, unbundling police and using unarmed administrative agents and in an agency for things like traffic stops where a lot of police interactions occur when it comes to speeding tickets or some sort of traffic violation. Why not move that away from, for example, in Chicago, the Chicago Police Department, and let them focus on, the major crimes, not speeding or lane change violations and that sort of thing. Not that CPD does a lot of that to begin with, but I mean, that's still the main interaction with police and civilians. So what about the idea of unbundling some of the things police are asked to do, like, for example, that?
Mm-hmm. Most people, that's their first issue with law enforcement is a traffic stop. That's their one and their only interaction for a lot of people in this country. And it's usually frustrating. It's usually scary. And I would love to see someone with an MS, master's, social work, get out there and walk up on a car in some of our neighborhoods, in any neighborhood, and try to conduct a safe approach to a vehicle. Because besides domestics, traffic stops can go completely upside down in a matter of a heartbeat. And you are on guard until you get to that vehicle. You don't know who that person is, where they came from, what they did, if they're on a warrant, if they've just committed a crime, if they have weapons or narcotics or something in the vehicle. But
the argument, Dean, the argument, Dean, is that knowing it's not a police officer, knowing that it's not a person who's armed, it would be more like an inspection of a restaurant or something like that by an administrative agency that doesn't have police powers, that is unarmed. So it would de-escalate those types of situations, and you're just writing a citation. And if the person takes off, the person takes off. It's just like ripping up a parking ticket. You can rip it up. It doesn't mean you're not going to get it in the mail, and it's not going to go on against your plate, right?
Right, but then you're going to wind up with a lot of people hurt, too, that are approaching those cars that don't have the ability to either defend, protect, or recognize that threat.
Fair point.
And that is where you separate the classroom approach to this is when you taste that work. This is when you experience that increased heart rate, and you have to remain focused, even though you're experiencing a sense of tunnel vision. And it doesn't stop until you break that relationship with that individual, again, in a matter of heartbeats. Hey, and Dean, then your guard is down.
Hey, Dean, can we hold you over? You got time? Because I want to continue this conversation, but we got to go to news right now.
Sure.
All right, more with Dean Angelo, former president of Chicago FOP, right after we check the news with Mike Scott.
Yeah. Good morning, Mike.
A man dies after falling onto a third rail at a Chicago CTA station. Lollapalooza, Taste of Chicago, canceled in the city, and a man in custody after a deadly near North Side shooting. WIND, Chicago News Time, 7.
Black and blue. I'm Chris Foster, Fox News. Police brutality, especially against African Americans, is the subject of a House Judiciary Committee hearing today.
Set to testify, George Floyd's brother and family lawyer Benjamin Crump, along with former Secret Service agent and Fox News contributor Dan Bongino. The hearing comes as some cities consider plans to defund police departments. Democratic Representative James Clyburn pushed back on that idea on Fox's Neil Cavuto.
Get rid of the rotten apples. They will ruin the whole barrel if you don't.
The police chief of Houston, Texas, is expected to testify that defunding police could ultimately increase the need for police services in the poorest communities. Rachel Sutherland, Fox News.
During a peaceful march in Franklin Township, New Jersey Monday, a group of counter-protesters yelled things like, "Black Lives Matter to no one," with one man pretending to kneel on another's neck to mock how George Floyd died. The man identified as the one doing the kneeling is now fired from his job at FedEx. Another is suspended from his job as a prison corrections officer. It was primary day in 5 states, with some people waiting hours to vote in parts of Nevada, with even more problems in Georgia.
Many people who voted in Georgia's primary had a really hard time doing it.
We got
notifications that the machines were not working and that they were going to try to rectify the situation. Then we waited another couple hours after that.
Georgia's primary was postponed twice amid concerns about COVID-19. The Georgia Secretary of State, a Republican, says he's investigating problems, but Kamala Harris is already ruling. Voting machines down, limited provisional ballots, hours-long lines. Voter suppression is happening right now across Georgia, particularly in black communities.
Fox's Peter Ducey. Hospitals in Arizona are told to reactivate emergency coronavirus plans. Cases and hospitalizations are spiking there and in other southwestern states. America's listening to Fox News.
Partly sunny, 71 degrees at 7:02 on AM 560. The Answer. Good morning. I'm Mike Scott. After a night of rough weather this morning, ComEd still patching up power. Severe thunderstorm warnings, even a tornado warning in the area, causing trees to tumble, and there was some property damage. An off-duty Chicago police officer is dead. A woman in critical condition. Both were exposed to carbon monoxide on the northwest side. The officer and woman found unresponsive last night at a home in the 3900 block of West Ainsley. A man in custody following a deadly shooting and a rooftop chase on Chicago's near north side. Police say a man was shot early this morning in the hallway of a residential building. He was taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Responding officers spotted a man running from the scene and made an arrest in the 1400 block of North Cleveland Avenue after a brief rooftop foot chase. A man is dead after falling onto the third rail of the Red Line tracks at the Grand Station on Chicago's near north side. Police say the man was sitting on the platform before entering a track area, tripped and fell before hitting the electrified third rail. The COVID-19 pandemic taking a toll on Chicago's finances.
We are projecting that the 2020 budget shortfall will be close to $700 million. That's a sobering number, and it presents a sobering challenge.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot, summer's going to be a lot less eventful this year. The city has canceled all of its major summer festivals like Lollapalooza and the Air and Water Show. Catholic school students in Chicago returning to the classroom this fall, according to Cardinal Blaise Supich, while Governor Pritzker says he's confident students in Illinois will return back to the classroom this fall in public schools.
We have to consider the public health implications because I think you've seen that there are circumstances in which young people can get a version of coronavirus. We want to make sure that doesn't happen, not to mention all the people who work at our schools.
Pritzker adds some are preparing for the possibility of more remote learning. The news, a service of CVS. CVS Pharmacy delivers, and right now to meet the needs of current health situations, they're offering free 1 to 2 day delivery of prescriptions and other store essentials. Visit CVS.com. Call your local CVS pharmacy to get started. Restrictions apply. 7:04, a check of traffic and weather on the way next on AM 560.
Dennis Prager fights to get life back to normal.
I'm telling you, folks, this is the greatest battle in America since the Civil War. You must voluntarily go out of business. A part of it's physical survival, and I never talk that way. I'm against the existential threat language of the left. Everything's an existential threat. But if you scare people enough, fear is the motivator.
The Dennis Prager Show, weekdays at 11, right before Sean Hannity at 2 on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of Nature, changing the world one life at a time.
So I went to the ophthalmologist for my eye exam. I usually go yearly. He says, "What are you doing?" And I told him about Balance of Nature. He said, "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up."
My primary doctor, she couldn't get over how much better I was doing. She said she'd never seen anything like it.
I hope this is really kicking off because it's been a godsend, I'm telling you. I mean, I'm a pharmacist, and for 2 years, I haven't had a cold. Balance of Nature has impacted my life in a positive way.
Don't wait to see what getting over 10 servings of whole fruits and vegetables every day can do for you. Right now, Balance of Nature is offering free shipping and 35% off on any new preferred order. Start your journey to better health today by calling 1-800-2468-751 or by going to balanceofnature.com and make sure to receive this special radio offer by using discount code Chicago.
America has never been so divided. Now, David Horowitz's Blitz exposes the media war on President Trump and their secret agenda to stop him. Already a #1 bestseller, Mark Levin says Blitz is indispensable. Mike Huckabee says you need it for the 2020 election. Blitz is in bookstores, or get the free offer and save $28. Call 800-NEWSMAX. That's 800-NEWSMAX. Or go to blitz411.com. Blitz411.com. Get David Horowitz's Blitz today.
We're all in uncharted territory, looking for ways to support our communities. At Dell Technologies, we're making sure small businesses have the right tech solutions. Dell Technologies advisors are here for you, from helping small businesses stay connected and productive while working remotely with Windows 10 and Microsoft Teams, to rapidly deploying remote work solutions that limit upfront costs with Dell Financial Services. We're standing by you every step of the way. Call 877-ASK-DELL. That's 877-ASK-DELL.
Want the same internet, but more privacy? DuckDuckGo's got you covered. They help millions of people like you get privacy online without any trade-offs. With one download, you can search and browse privately, avoiding trackers, all for free. DuckDuckGo. Privacy simplified.
7:07. Let's check the roads in the Team Hochberg Traffic Center with Jim Talamonte.
CTA Green Line service is cut off right now on the south side between Ashland, 63rd, and Garfield after there was an unauthorized person on the tracks. Same true of the Blue Line, with service not operating between Jefferson Park and O'Hare, with an unauthorized person on the tracks near Harlem on the O'Hare branch. Metro Union Pacific Northwest train 608 due downtown at 7:17, stopped near Pingree Road with a tree on the tracks. Inbound Ryan, traffic slows 75th, 71st with a crash on the shoulder. Then from the Stevenson to the Burn Circle, it's 20 minutes, 95th to downtown. Seeing slight delays on the inbound Eisenhower and inbound Stevenson. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our 1 hour heating and air conditioning weather center, our forecast with Steve Williams.
Times of clouds and sun, shower or thunderstorm, windy today, high 85, partly cloudy, windy tonight, low 57. Sunny, winds diminish tomorrow, the high 82. Sunny clouds and breezy Friday, a passing shower, high 80. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
74 at O'Hare. Next news at 7:30 with breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Joe Biden sat for an interview by Norah O'Donnell, CBS News, for one of their upcoming melodramatic specials on race in America that will be hosted by Oprah's BFF. And Biden was asked about the defund police movement. Should we defund and dismantle police departments? Should we eliminate federal funding for police departments?
You've seen the Black Lives Matter painted on that street just outside the White House. Some demonstrators added equals defund the police. Do you support defunding the police?
No, I don't support defunding the police. I support conditioning federal aid to police based on whether or not they meet certain basic standards of decency and honorableness and, in fact, are able to demonstrate they can protect the community and everybody in the community.
He's sort of middling the issue, isn't he? Yeah. No, of course not, except they have to act honorably. Well, that sort of starts from the premise that they're not acting honorably. For more on this, we're rejoined by Dean Angelo Sr. He's the former president of the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police and retired Chicago police officer himself. Dean, thanks for being with us still. And your reaction to what Joe Biden said about federal support for state and local police, just predicated on them being honorable and proving that they can serve the communities, protect and serve the communities they're charged with protecting and serving.
Well, I think a lot of people in politics are going to have to start doing a little bit of a moonwalk because the rhetoric over the last several years has more or less fueled what we're seeing right now because they vilified the police. I mean, you look at what we experienced in the city of Chicago. The city council was adamant and going to tear up our contract here after they read it. Because remember, some of them never read it, even though they voted on approving 5 of them over the course of their time down there. But
vote on it to see what's in it.
Yeah, right. You should. It's like signing a document without reading it, and then complaining about it. But this is a situation that a lot of them have contributed to over the last few years, and now this movement has more or less crossed that line that they drew in the sand, and they're at that, oh my God, what do we do point, I think. There's a lot that is attached to this defunding. You're looking at training, you're looking at vehicles, you're looking at equipment. You want technology in the squad cars, and you want body cameras, and the storage of those cameras is so expensive, of that footage, I should say. And now they're going to have to say, well, wait a minute, we have to support the police and fund the police, and it's contrary to what they've been spewing for the last few years. And I think it's getting a little bit out of their control, and they're realizing that they're not very comfortable with the direction that this new wave is taking them.
Well, yesterday, Mayor Lightfoot was asked about defunding police, and she came back with she wants people to be licensed, police officers to be licensed, similar to, if you're an esthetician or you're a hair cutter, that you have to have a license. What do you think about that?
There's a state certification that everyone in Illinois has to pass from the Illinois Standard and Training Board down in Springfield. They mandate you pass that state test before you can get licensed to serve in that community, or certified maybe is the better word. But there are requirements of every officer that's fully sworn in the state of Illinois already. And again, we're in an area where people are talking about things that they're not that familiar with. You could make that the license, and it's already in place. So that could comfort some people looking for some type of licensing. But I think what they're looking for is a statewide stamp of approval that allows you to work within the state of Illinois. And their big concern about that is an officer that leaves one department under a cloud of accusation or administrative, issues, and goes to another department, and those issues don't follow him.
That's the old dance of the lemons that we see in public schools all the time, but nobody wants to do anything about the teachers' unions and the dance of the lemons that goes on in K through 12 education. But
right. And so same thing with transferring a priest from one parish to another parish.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right. And those policies are bad, whether it's the police department or K through 12 or the Catholic Church. Absolutely. So there's not much argument about that, is there? Even from the union.
I wouldn't think so. Well, but the union has that body to protect. We have in the city of Chicago, President Canizara has a document to protect with his members. What happens outside his jurisdiction? Does he have the time or the interest to get involved in that?
No, but so take a step back to
support it or lobby it for it.
Right. Take a step back. Take a step back to the bargaining table, though, and should police, should FOP and other union representatives be saying, "Hey, look, I'm happy to have a provision in here that makes it, as long as there are due process protections, that makes it easier than it is at present to remove a officer who has multiple disciplinary events, complaints that are adjudicated, and the officer was found to have committed some sort of wrongdoing, professional, even much less criminal, obviously, and we can expedite the removal of those police officers. That shouldn't be too controversial, should it?
Well, I think the more controversial thing that agencies or municipalities will not consider, which I think might be interesting to unions, is the hiring process and the background checks and where you're getting these individuals from. Because when officers walk into the academy, you've got 250 people walking in the Chicago Police Academy that no one in the union has ever talked to, has ever screened, has ever evaluated, or even looked at their interview as far as their evaluation process. And then you stamp them approved and you give them to the union. Now the union has to deal with your hire. You screened him. And now you're telling me, well, we've got this guy, he's a bad apple. But wait a minute, you hired him. And now we have to, with our language of the collective bargaining agreement, protect that guy and that girl's livelihood and employment.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think
That's a good point.
When you become a plumber, you go to the school on right next to FOP, and they train you, they intern you, and they stamp you whether you're, if you're going to be a certified plumber, or they kick you out because you can't cut it. When in law enforcement, you're not involved in that process. You're getting the finished product, and you don't even know if that product meets the minimal qualifications. Is this a person that you wanted to work with, or you would want to work with?
I want to go back to it's a good point about the hiring, and that's an area for reform in the other direction, perhaps. That's an interesting point. But I want to go back to defunding. Melina Abdullah, who's a co-founder of Black Lives Matter in L.A., we're in the midst of a health pandemic with an economic fallout. Why would you be spending more on police? This is the argument just for Garcetti and de Blasio, maybe Lightfoot, certainly the crew in Minneapolis to defund, reimagine the police. And it turns out that state and local spend on police as a percentage of total spend has remained constant over the last 40 years at about 4% of state and local direct general expenditures. Really interesting. If you look at spending, and people have looked at this, imagine that. So it's readily findable. I found it. Correction spending and police spending has been basically flat as, inflation adjusted as a percentage of overall state and local spending on everything over the last 40 years, while other spending has gone up at about a 35-degree angle. And one of the things that the left normally says is that if you cut spending with respect to any government agency, it becomes less effective and less able to provide its core services. But somehow, with police, and I'm not necessarily an opponent of cutting spending everywhere that there is public spending, but I'm just using their logic and trying to follow here. You cut spending in any government agency, and you have jeopardized the public. You're killing people, children will die, and so on and so forth. You cut spending with respect to police, and the left argument turns to, we have to cut spending there. So that agency necessarily becomes less effective because that's the argument you make with respect to every other government agency. So maybe it's time to put that logic to the test for the left.
Well, if you look at how the equipment fails or the equipment isn't available, whether it's a vehicle, a computer, a body camera, the microphones in the car, when we went through a lot of those issues, we found that there was in upwards of 60% or 70% of those vehicles and the sound systems weren't working properly. When you have the body cameras and you want to issue them because you want to know everything that a police officer does from the time they take out their radio until the time they drop it off, that's expensive. Yeah, and that technology, I think, is generating some of the increases in costs along.
Well, and by the way, with respect to that police spend, it's only capital expenditures has only been about 5% of the spend. I mean, the overwhelming majority of the spend is all salaries and benefits, which you expect. That's what it is with personnel in any enterprise. Mm-hmm. But it's just, it's a small percentage of the overall spend is the capital equipment that's otherwise being mandated by legislators and executives. So they decry, again, another area where they decry unfunded mandates, except when it's an unfunded mandate they want to impose on an agency they don't like.
And then we just found the money to support it as well. There's always that fund that they can find to take care of the issues that are important for them. Defunding the police, you mentioned Minnesota. I know that or Minneapolis, the university up there just cut ties with the police.
Minnesota.
The president of the school got a letter from an undergrad student saying that it should be considered. Now they don't want them having the bomb dogs sweep the stadium before the football games, or be at any of the major events, work on-campus investigations. And we know about sexual attacks and assaults that occur on campuses across the country. And now you're just going to have the campus police without the support or input from the local police agency.
This is spreading like a virus too. I just want to localize it.
Yeah.
North Central College in Naperville is going to stop allowing police to use the campus to stage equipment for public safety operations during large downtown events in downtown Naperville, the Riverwalk area. So North Central College, small liberal arts college in Naperville, is succumbing to the Scarlet P culture as well.
Right. And police officers that are students on those campuses can't, they don't want them armed. They don't want them identifying themselves as police. They don't want them coming in uniform. It's too intimidating, and it's putting these college students in a state of fright because there's a police officer on campus or taking a class with them, or they're armed walking down the hall. I mean, things are completely upside down, and they're getting, ridiculous. I don't know how much more, how much worse it gets than upside down, but it's nothing new as far as this distrust, but it's taking on a life of its own, and it's working its roots into every area that we're going to be exposed with in the future. And I don't know where it ends or how they get to a middle road, as they come out of this. But it's going to be pretty tough, and it's going to take a while. It's going to take a lot longer than it did to get back to work on a semi-normal basis post-Ferguson, that's for sure.
Yeah, and, I just wanted to ask you about that Chicago police officer was stripped of his powers following, he flipped off one of the protesters while he was inside a van. Lori Lightfoot seems, hell-bent on making sure he loses his job, but she doesn't have the final say. The police board does, correct?
Right, the police board does, and then there's appeal process if, in fact, they uphold separation over an issue like that. Discipline, and it's in every document dealing with law enforcement, discipline is designed to be progressive. And it's also designed to adjust someone's behaviors. So if this kid's got no background, how do you fire him on his first incident? It's supposed to be an opportunity to redirect his behavior, redirect his involvement and his passion to the job and to performing properly. It's not one and you're done. This isn't what a lot of people say: if you lie, you die. So if you lie on your report, you're separated because you lose the ability to be considered credible in a court of law when you raise your hand. So you don't have the ability to testify without being called into question, or your background being called into question about falsifying an official document. This is different. This is a behavior thing.
And a relatively innocuous one at that. I mean, all things considered in context,
And following a 12-hour day face-to-face with these aggressive crowds, and then
screaming
for one second you slip or you forget where you're at, or you fail to realize that, hey, this is going to go viral, and you just do it anyway. That's an error in judgment. It's
it's cheap politics on the part of Lightfoot, just trying to look for scapegoats, to focus on hating the police. Don't focus on my response to rioting on the streets. That's the cheapest form of politics. It's so transparent. It's so obvious to 25% of Chicago's population that has firing synapses. It
doesn't help the morale of the girls and the guys that are out there continuing to protect everybody.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. if I do one thing, I'm going to get fired. Now you start second guessing everything you do and you say because you're on camera constantly.
Dean, we were talking last hour just about all the roles that police are expected to play, and I offered one way to unbundle some of the roles and suggesting an idea. I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but just a discussion about outsourcing traffic stops to an administrative agency rather than law enforcement. You raised some fair concerns about that. But all these roles that police are required to play, is there a way to unbundle some of what police responsibilities are and make it more focused, the responsibilities more distributed across government?
Well, I think they're looking at doing that already with the privatization of police, more or less police work, a step above security work at these mini malls or strip malls. Local communities have had, they have a South Chicago Avenue, I think, business district policing group. It's a private group that comes out and assists in those areas. They're easily identified. Their uniforms are marked like a police uniform, and they've been out there in these communities for a few years now. I think what you're going to see is an expansion of that. And how that plays out eventually, we'll see, because the professionalism of those individuals will be looked at the first incident that they're involved in. And is it cost effective or is it a mistake? And they'll figure that out as these incidents break out, and we see what happens when someone's trying to either effect an arrest or stop a shoplifter or a group from gathering in those areas. So I think you're going to see a blended approach. I don't think you're going to see an end of police involvement in these traffic stops as the example we talked about. I would encourage, and I know they don't want to do it, is get the politicians in the squad cars in their communities. Get them out there. Let them see what these officers experience. Get those social workers and everyone that wants to defund the police, put them in a ride-along. Let them approach the car.
I'll tell you what, Amy and I have both done it. I did it a couple years ago in Canaryville, and it was eye-opening. No question about it. It was eye-opening.
Yeah. And every single stop, it's the same eye-opening experience. You don't know what's at the other end of that stop. I think Heather McDonald just put something out where they had over 370 million interactions with the police last year. Mm-hmm. And they've had overwhelmingly high qualifications. The gentleman from New York used it when he was at the microphone. You look at the percentage of interactions that go bad with the